We all had that phase while growing up, you know? One day we discovered a certain genre of music that spoke to us, and in a fit of teen angst, we grabbed our mum's eyeliner and based our entire identities around being cringe. But that's fine, you know? We were young and we didn't know any better. Besides, trying to find your niche is an important part of growing up and finding out who we are. The worst that could happen is that we get told to grow up and get a haircut. Or people would just make fun of us. Which they did. However, that wasn't the case everywhere. In the West, if you were an emo, people just pretty much made fun of you. But in some of the more, let's just say, conservative parts of the world, the consequences of having such a phase were much, much more severe than, just being a disappointment to your parents. As a result, many young people were in serious trouble. And they're not okay, I promise. There's going to be a lot of that in this video. The Iraq Emo Killings. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get into the video, it is my factual boy, Raid Shadow Legends. The game brings back memories of fantasy nostalgia, something you can take anywhere and play at any time. And for the sponsor, Raid want me to react to one of my old adverts that I did for them so that I can see how much has changed since then, so here we go. I was so proud of myself for actually finally getting a sponsor on YouTube. Raid were actually my first ever sponsor. Even during the adpocalypse and everything, Raid were the ones that kept the lights on for bloody everyone. And I'm seeing here as well, this is me filming like in my old house at home. And like look at me now, I've got my own studio, I've got staff, if you want to call them that. I also remember how Raid wouldn't let me make jokes about how many of their characters have absolutely massive. But as for physically, I mean my beard's pretty nice there. I was obviously back when I went to the barber a lot more often.
So click the link.
Yeah. Not much has changed.
Click the link.
I've got fatter. This month in Raid there will be special events every single day, including an entirely new event for the summer solstice called the Path of Light. You will be able to explore 3 branching paths to get the rewards that you want the most. On top of that, there's even more awesome new champions coming out, and a set of skins for the amazing Trunda Gilt Mallet. They look great and hopefully I'll be able to get them myself. But there is more. Raid is currently running a special Deliana Chase event where you can get the amazing Deliana, a brand new legendary champion from the High Elves faction, just by logging in. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and July the 20th, and you will get Deliana for free. Deliana is one of the strongest support champions in the entire game, and she can help carry your team to get past many of Raid's tougher challenges. This is the best time to get started in Raid Shadow Legends, so if you click my link in the description or if you scan the QR code on the screen, you will get a free starter pack worth almost $30. You will get the free epic champion Tyrell, plus 200,000 silver, an energy refill, an XP booster, and an ancient shard, so you can summon an amazing champion as soon as you get into the game. These rewards are only available to new players and only for the next 30 days, and you can find these rewards here in your inbox. And also there is even more. All new players can even enter promo code MyDeliana to get 50 XP brews, which means that you can instantly level Deliana up to the max level of 50, as well as a ton of silver on the side. At the turn of the millennium, Iraq was actually a fairly decent place to live, by Middle Eastern standards. There was law and order, there was decent nightlife, and despite not having any constitutionally protected rights, gay people and those that lived alternative lifestyles were pretty much left alone as long as they kept it to themselves and they stayed out of the more conservative districts and neighbourhoods. Even though the country was a dictatorship that brutally persecuted any dissidents and several ethnic minorities, Saddam Hussein's regime allowed most average Iraqi people to live in relative comfort, as long as they didn't bump into his son. Now, it sounds unlikely, but this was because despite all of Saddam Hussein's flaws, of which there were a fucking lot, his regime was about as secular as the Muslim world gets. However, there was just one problem. Iraq had oil. In 2003, the US invaded and threw everything into chaos. The weapons of mass destruction were never found because there was never any in the first place. The entire country became a war zone and Saddam was ousted and hanged. And the US did such a great job of spreading freedom to the Iraqi people that the power vacuum was filled by a Shiite Muslim government, so named because their behaviour was fucking shite. The new regime was much more conservative than Saddam was, and the foundations of decay were immediately apparent. Before long, it was horribly clear that all the invasion really achieved was bringing Sharia law to Iraq. And with Sharia law came brutal violence against anyone that the Islamic fundamentalists did not like. But what does all of this have to do with emos? Well, the war on terror laying waste to almost every Middle Eastern country except for the one that Osama bin Laden was actually hiding in, funny that. That was all one thing. But undoubtedly, the worst consequence of 9/11 for the Middle East and, in my opinion, for the rest of the world was undoubtedly because it inspired a man called Gerard Way to start a little band that you might have heard of called My Chemical Romance. Now, I'm not saying that George Bush inadvertently started the emo craze, but is there anything more emo than a country doing a little bit of self-harm? But anyway, the point is that in the years after, George Bush's little spring clean, the emo subculture began to become popular in Iraq around 2011. It was quickly decided that such a lifestyle was absolutely haram, with one Shiite leader calling it crazy and stupid. It also didn't help that the emo subculture was seen as a Western invention, which provoked a lot of xenophobia. Many fundamentalist clerics cried out, "Teenagers scare the living shit out of me." I told you there was going to be a lot of these. And the emos found themselves getting targeted with a vengeance. In March of 2012, several emos found notices posted on their doors, and these notices read, "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we warn every male and female in the strongest terms to stop their dirty deeds in 4 days before the wrath of God strikes them through the hands of the Mujahideen." Basically, emos were being threatened by the Mujahideen. This video is dedicated to all the brave Mujahideen fighters. Similar posters were also put up on the walls of cafes, street corners, and even in schools around Baghdad. And the posters basically said, Habibi, you better find better music and improve your relationship with your father, or we're going to fucking kill you, inshallah." They put up pamphlets in schools openly threatening to murder school children. Like, I don't even have a joke for that. That's just fucked. The absurd cruelty of such an idea was not lost on the emos, who were very quick to point out that the instructions to go back to the path of righteousness were very vague and subjective at best, and that they would still look different from everyone else, even if they did cut their hair. It also didn't help that the definition of emo, as the Shiites understood it, was so broad that it didn't really matter whether the victims were actually emos or not. Like, young women with tattoos were targeted for imitating men, effeminate-looking men and guys with long hair were targeted for looking like women. I know what you mean. And, and pretty much anyone who was in a metal band or with non-traditional piercings, they were also persecuted for being a bit too edgy or something. The nature of the attacks even got to the point where simply wearing black clothes was enough to make someone feel unsafe. As one emo teenager put it, and I quote, "Personally, I'm having trouble with the idea of altering the way I dress or cutting my hair to avoid becoming a target. I don't understand this hatred against us. We are not doing anything wrong. We don't share the spirit of emos in other countries who are often solitary, depressed, and talk about suicide and self-harm. For us, being emo is just about style." However, arguing semantics with the Mujahideen wouldn't have gotten these people very far, because these demands to conform were very far from just idle threats. Very soon, emos found themselves being confronted in the street by angry fundamentalists who told them to grow mustaches and start dressing like men, or else. And believe it or not, the emos that were harassed like this were actually the lucky ones, because they were given time to change their ways and to flee to a less fucked up part of the country. Many of the others had to suffer the consequences of their life choices on the spot. And the consequences were pretty bad. Entire militias were rising up to deal with the emo scourge, and they carried around lists of local emos that referred to the targets as people of Sodom. Many emos that appeared on these lists were just straight up kidnapped or murdered right on the spot. Attacks mostly took place in the capital of Baghdad and in the southern provinces of Iraq, where the Shiite factions were at their strongest. The attacks mostly consisted of emos having their heads bashed in with concrete blocks because, stoning's still a thing over there. And to add a bit of variety to their campaign, the militias also threw emos off the roofs of buildings or just simply shot them before dumping their bodies into skips or just leaving the bodies lying out in the middle of the street. Now, that sounds absolutely brutal, but believe it or not, there were several emos that somehow managed to survive such a horrific attack. And then they found themselves being murdered while in the hospital because the militias heard they survived and then went to the hospital to finish the job. In addition to the blatant murders, there were also reports of mysterious suicides, which, well, they are emos, but these were obviously murders that were disguised to look like suicides. And as if beating and murdering the emos wasn't enough, the militias also tackled the problem at the source by burning down shops that sold emo clothing and accessories, making Hot Topic that little bit hotter. But why? Honestly, why do this? Other than just being fucking evil, why did the militias do this? The emos aren't exactly a threat, since the only people they pose any real danger to is themselves. I mean, we all know why no one really likes them, but what could possibly justify killing them? Well, it was all because of the second biggest enemy of Islamic extremists, gay people. The emos were accused of being gay. Which, yeah, okay, fair. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that one. However, that still does not justify killing them, though. That does not justify killing them. However, on top of that, the emos were also accused of being devil worshippers and Freemasons. Emo Freemasons who would influence the youth towards degeneracy and suicide, because when your country has been taken over by barbarians that are stuck in the past, of course the satanic panic is going to come 30 years late. Speaking of Freemasons, some religious officials put their tinfoil hats on and speculated that the emos were actually Mossad agents that were tasked with spreading vice and perversion in their society. That's right, emos were working for Mossad. And in addition to all of those, let's be honest, cliched accusations, some of the Shiite fundamentalists also believed that emos are members of vampire cults that suck blood from each other's wrists. I mean, it isn't really hard to see where they got that idea from. But just think of how ridiculous that sounds. In their justification for brutal murder, it went from they are different and I don't like them to they are literally Dracula and work for Mossad. Also, killing people who don't follow Sharia law is kind of the fundamentalists' thing, you know. So the militias carried out the emo killings as part of their jihad in order to earn their 72 virgins in heaven. You know, killing virgins to attain the virgins. However, I'm not going to lie, carrying out a campaign of mass murder to get some girls, simp behaviour. In the wake of the emo killings, reactions were very mixed. Yeah, not universally condemned, but mixed. Obviously, there was a massive outcry from the international community and human rights groups, with the Dutch government extending its asylum programme to Iraqi citizens who were at risk because of state-financed aggressors. On the domestic side, there was a lot of approval from fundamentalist religious groups who said that emos should be exterminated. But there was also a degree of condemnation, with calls for an official police investigation into the murders. But unfortunately, the government's response was about as disappointing as you would expect. Iraq's Interior Ministry pretty much denied that the emo killings had even taken place. They said that they didn't have any knowledge whatsoever about any anti-gay or anti-emo killings, and they dismissed all these reports as anti-Islamic and anti-government propaganda. However, despite denying any knowledge of the attacks, they did admit that the recent murders could be for, and I quote, revenge or social, criminal, political, or cultural reasons. I mean, they knew. They fucking knew. They knew exactly why these murders had taken place. And not only did they know, but many people believe that there were cops and government officials who actually took part in the killings while they were disguised as civilians. However, the lack of outright endorsement might be somewhat honest, because it is also believed that part of the reason why the government did nothing about the killings was the fact that the militias were just too strong to rein in. Iraq's entire system was still completely upheaved by the American invasion. The government was a delicate house of straw, so the fundamentalists operated with impunity because government officials were afraid of what would happen if they got in the fundamentalists' way. Which isn't an excuse to do nothing, but, you know, especially given recent events, you all know what cops are like. Luckily, there was actually a surprising amount of condemnation from religious officials within Iraq who called the killings un-Islamic acts of terrorism. However, their opposition of the murders didn't mean that they supported the emos' right to exist as they chose. They still agreed that emos are, in their words, a lesion on the Muslim community, and that it was everyone's religious duty to advise young emos and guide them towards a better path. In other words, their stance was pretty much, I'm not going to kill you, but your fatherless behaviour is embarrassing us. Stop it. Also speaking out against the killings was the emos themselves. I'm sure you'll be very shocked to hear that. A few of them had refused to take this lying down, and they chose the path of defiance over submitting to the militia's demands. After losing friends, they had pretty much nothing left to lose, and they decided to stand up for who they were, consequences be damned.
But God willing, in the future, I will stick to my clothes and I will keep my hair long and I will not cut it. Now I was forced to change my clothes, and what will happen? Let them kill me.
While I admire their commitment to freedom of expression, I don't really think that's the hill to die on. It's not a fashion statement, it's a death wish. Overseas, the international reaction was obviously a mixture of shock and condemnation, especially in the West. However, this unfortunately wasn't the case everywhere. As far as the Middle East is concerned, the emos were pretty much on their own. While they were being murdered en masse in Iraq, life wasn't exactly easy for emos in other Middle Eastern countries. Granted, they don't exactly make it easy for themselves in the West either, but you know what I mean. Egyptian conservatives would very often accuse emos of being gay and disciples of Satan, which isn't very creative, but in Saudi Arabia, emos, tomboys and gay people aren't even allowed to go to school or university. And emo women have actually been arrested for going to cafes for the alleged crime of disturbing public disorder. In the end, we can't really be certain of how many emos were murdered because of the sketchy nature of the government's response, and there are even some groups that believe it is still happening to this day, just to a much lesser degree than it was before. It also doesn't help that there are hardly any first-hand accounts of the killings, because those that lost friends were simply too scared to speak out. As you would expect, the Iraqi government reported much lower figures than official human rights groups did, but it is widely agreed that the vast majority of the victims were young men. In total, it is estimated that between 50 to over 100 emos joined the Black Parade throughout the month that the majority of the killings took place. And with such a kill count under their belts, the emo hunting militias went home and celebrated a job well done with 3 cheers for sweet revenge. Come on, allow me. I told you there was going to be a lot of these. Okay. On a serious note, I think it is very obvious that the emo killings were an absolute fucking tragedy, which was only made worse by the fact that the victims were mostly just teenagers trying to express themselves. Murdering people simply for the way they express themselves is barbaric and the signs of a failed society. It doesn't matter how you may feel about it, freedom of expression is their right, and it is one that should be protected for everyone, not just those that align with your morals. Just because their lifestyle is different to everyone else's doesn't mean that they are less deserving of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, they are still cringe.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody should subscribe!